quick, name an archaeologist. Ah, a real archaeologist. Yeah, not so easy, is it? I asked this because I myself had a little trouble coming up with the name of any real archaeologist. I had to hem and haw for a bit before I finally landed on the Leakeys. They count, right? And yeah, they did a lot of important stuff, but I know for a fact that there are other archaeologists out there, living and dead, who have contributed major discoveries. And while I may know the details of some of those discoveries, I don't necessarily know the people who worked very hard to discover them. And if you ask the average Netflix subscriber to name an archaeologist, there's a very good chance that they'll do even worse than me. There's a very good chance that the first name they'll come up with is Graham Hancock. And that would be disappointed because despite the fact that he does have a very successful Netflix show about archaeology, Graham Hancock is not, in fact, an archaeologist. He is not a scientist at all. He is, in fact, a pseudoscientist. I've actually never made a video about Graham Hancock, despite the fact that he has been quacking his quackery for several decades now. Ancient archaeology isn't really my thing, and I feel like there are a bunch of experts online who have already done a great job of addressing his claims. But last week, I made a video about the Foo Fighters spreading dangerous misinformation, and in that video, I very briefly compared Dave Grohl to Keanu Reeves, since both of them have enjoyed many years of positive, nice guy PR in the mainstream media and online. And in the comments, some of you expressed a general foreboding about what that meant for Keanu, and others already knew what is in store for Keanu, his inevitable comeuppance. Now, you might already guess where I'm going with this. Netflix has just released the trailer for season 2 of Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse series, and you'll never guess who's in it.
I mean, as a kid, I always thought the timeline was off.
Okay. First of all, pitchforks down. This isn't quite the disaster that was Dave Grohl funding an organization that caused hundreds of thousands of preventable deaths from HIV and AIDS for several years after scientists and activists publicly begged him to stop doing that. But it's still not great. Keanu is definitely going to encourage more people to find and watch Graham Hancock's silly fictional TV show. So it's important that we pre-bunk it now. Because if you don't obsessively follow a bunch of scientists online, you might find Hancock really convincing. According to the only piece of trivia on his IMDb page, Graham considers himself to be a journalist and not a scientist. That is such an interesting tidbit. That's like me announcing that I consider myself to be a YouTuber and not a brain surgeon. It's like, yeah, Graham, nobody considers you to be a scientist either. At least other scientists don't. People in the mainstream might end up with the idea mistakenly that you are a scientist, though, because that's how you present your ideas in the many books you've written, the TV shows you've been in, the Joe Rogan podcasts you've starred on. In all of these, he largely claims that archaeologists are big dumb jerks who hate new ideas and refuse to change their minds when presented with new evidence. And also, even though he has no evidence for it, those people should be more open-minded about his own new idea that ancient civilizations were way too stupid to build impressive structures, and that they must have received help from some other ancient civilization that was far superior to them, but which probably got completely wiped out from the planet during the last ice age, like the people of Atlantis. Yes, the underwater city ruled by Aquaman and protected by trained sharks with lasers on their head. That Atlantis. Hancock's big ideas are, when put that bluntly, obviously completely bonkers. But if you watch his show, he's actually remarkably convincing. For instance, I'm going to refer to Potholer 54's video on this topic. If you are not familiar with him, you should be, because he's awesome. Links to everything I discuss are always in the transcript, which is linked in the description box. So please go check out his channel and subscribe if you're not. He's not an archaeologist, but he is a geologist and a very smart guy. And he started watching the original season of Hancock's show in order to pick out, any mistakes that might be in there. But after the first episode, he had enough material for his longest video to date. So he destroyed pretty much everything Hancock said in that episode. And then he even did a bonus follow-up deconstructing the most popularly requested episode 5. Potholer 54, or Peter Hatfield as he's known in the real world, points out many, many instances of Hancock straight up fabricating nonsense, which is very persuasive to the average viewer who doesn't suspect that a corporation like Netflix would just let a guy go on their streaming service and tell a bunch of lies. That's why when Netflix originally launched Hancock's new show, the Society for American Archaeology wrote them a letter begging them to stop airing it, or at least to stop classifying it as a documentary instead of like fantasy or whatever. But Potholer 54 points out that in addition to straight up lying about his facts, Hancock also engages in some really sneaky manipulation. I have to admit, when I saw this, I was actually impressed. This is so sneaky that had I just watched the show without Potholer 54 calling things out, I maybe would have missed this sleight of hand.
First, we hear Dr. Akbar explain that just below the surface, his team uncovered artifacts dating back to around 7,200 years ago, suggesting that humans had visited the site that far back. And Hancock initially reports this correctly.
They quickly found evidence that humans had been present in what's called a cultural lair.
That's right, evidence that humans had been present. Hardly surprising in an area where hunter-gatherers would have roamed 7,000 years ago and no doubt occasionally camped on top of the hill. But then Hancock very subtly switches the dates. He turns the humans who were here 7,200 years ago into the builders of a site that he's just been told is about 2,500 years ago.
An old, but not extremely old, megalithic site.
And the reason no one notices the switch is because he slips it into a question.
7,000 years ago, far from being builders on such an epic scale, there's no evidence that the people of this region were anything other than simple hunter-gatherers. What could have motivated them to make the immense effort of bringing all these...
That is not just an error. You can argue that Hancock's made-up facts are things he actually believes and aren't out-and-out lies, but this, to me at least, it seems like the kind of linguistic legerdemain that can only be done knowingly. So yeah, it sucks that Keanu Reeves is going to lend his fame to this dweeb's show. And yeah, I do mean dweeb. I know people like Potholer 54 work hard to avoid ad hominem attacks, but I'm sorry, just watch the end of this trailer and tell me this guy isn't the biggest fucking dork you've ever seen. So yeah, it sucks, but it is understandable that Keanu Reeves fell for this grifter. Unlike the Foo Fighters' favorite AIDS denialists, there isn't a very loud contingent of activists and scientists in the mainstream media pointing out that this guy is a kook. And I hope that we can be loud enough about him now so that Keanu and other celebrities will know not to take up or to drop support of this kookery now before he does more damage. Because yeah, Hancock's quackery, it's not as dangerous as AIDS denialism, but there is still harm in pseudo-archaeology. In his second video on the topic, Potholer 54 points out the damage done in Indonesia, where Hancock says a vast structure lies beneath Gunung Padang. The president of Indonesia agreed and encouraged amateurs to grab some shovels and run to that World Heritage Site and start digging, leading to damage to the site and a redirection of funds away from real archaeologically important projects. But it goes further than that. Let's go back to that letter from the Society for American Archaeology. They don't just argue that Hancock shouldn't be on Netflix because he lies about archaeological findings. He also, they point out, is spreading racist, white supremacist talking points. They note that Ancient Aliens, a show that Hancock has also appeared on, is racist enough because suggesting that indigenous cultures are too stupid to produce complicated cultural works robs them of credit for their cultural heritage. But Ancient Apocalypse, they point out, takes things a step further. The assertions Hancock makes have a history of promoting dangerous racist thinking. His claim for an advanced global civilization that existed during the Ice Age and was destroyed by comets is not new. This theory has been presented, debated, and refuted for at least 140 years. It dates to the publication of Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, 1882, and Ragnarok, the Age of Ice and Gravel, 1883, by Minnesota Congressman Ignatius Donnelly. This theory steals credit for indigenous accomplishments from indigenous peoples and reinforces white supremacy. From Donnelly to Hancock, proponents of this theory have suggested that white survivors of this advanced civilization were responsible for the cultural heritage of indigenous peoples in the Americas and around the world. However, the narratives on which claims of white saviors are based have been demonstrated to be ones modified by Spanish conquistadors and colonial authorities for their own benefit. These were subsequently used to promote violent white supremacy. Hancock's narrative emboldens extreme voices that misrepresent archaeological knowledge in order to spread false historical narratives that are overtly misogynistic, chauvinistic, racist, and anti-Semitic. They also point out that Hancock further contributes to this racist thinking by doing serious damage and tarnishing the entire field of archaeology. Now, we may have a stereotype of the archaeologist as an old white man in a pith helmet plundering cultural artifacts, but the present state of the discipline is way more diverse than that. They say specifically it's extremely diverse. Our membership represents a wide range of nationalities, ethnicities, genders, and beliefs. We do not always agree with each other. However, Netflix and ITN Productions are actively assaulting our expert knowledge, fostering distrust of our scientific community, diminishing the credibility of our members in the public eye, and undermining our extensive and ongoing efforts at outreach and public education. Along those lines, I found a great article by archaeologist Carl Fegans at University of Texas, who points out that pseudo-archaeologists like Hancock drag the public view of the field back to the days of that colonizer in the pith helmet. More aptly described as antiquarians, he writes, these early archaeologists sought the treasures and portable works of art from ancient cultures the world over. Much of their loot, and I use the term in its most accurate context, is still available to be viewed in museums around the world. Gradually, in the last decade or so, many of these collected pieces of art are beginning to find their way back to their home countries. And as an example, he cites the Parthenon marbles, which were stolen from Greece and still remain in the British Museum. He goes on to write, for all its majesty and prestige, I would highly doubt that the British Museum has a display of the pollen found in archaeological levels excavated from the same period. Yet the data gleaned from placing a bag of dirt in a bucket, then skimming off the stuff that floats to the top, tells more about the culture's diet, subsistence, and trade than perhaps the most valued of marble statues. The real treasure of an archaeological site is information, whether that information comes from the story told on a frieze or the pollen found at the same depth and in the same unit as a marble statue. The harm of pseudo-archaeology, therefore, is the sacrifice of information about a culture for the sake of promoting bad and wrong ideas, often at the expense of the very cultures that are central to them. Some pseudo-archaeological claims actually disenfranchise or marginalize the people responsible for wonderful achievements ranging from pyramids in Egypt to stone temples in Peru to magnificent mounds in North America. There is much to learn about ancient human cultures, and their narratives deserve to not be clouded and obscured by claims of giants, space aliens, or lost tribes of Israel, especially when evidence for these are spurious to non-existent. That's something Potholer54 touches on as well. The harm lies in part on us allowing our society to just accept these pretty and fun lies instead of understanding a more complicated but also more beautiful truth about the history of our very species. At the start of this video, I told you I haven't talked about Hancock before because archaeology just really isn't my thing. But I have to say, I spent several days watching videos and reading articles by archaeologists, and I think it is becoming my thing. It wasn't at all relevant to this video's focus on pseudo-archaeology, but through my research, I stumbled upon Dr. Brittany Brown, who not only studies the history of African Americans in the Southeast U.S., but also maritime sites, diving the wrecks of slave ships, collecting data that has gone ignored for centuries, but is integral to the history of African Americans and the history of all of us. And I am enamored, you guys. Please check out her Instagram at The Black Archaeologist. Give her a follow if you, like me, are getting more into this stuff. And on that note, I know that when I opened this video and said, quick, name an archaeologist, a bunch of you smarty pants had a name ready to go. You probably already commented it like at second 8 in this video. So go edit that comment or leave a new one. Tell us about an archaeologist, living or dead, who you think should be more famous than Graham Hancock, and tell us why. And maybe, just maybe, we can find a better person for Keanu Reeves to get to know. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.